Hey guys, okay, so today we're gonna dive into our watercolor techniques before we start into our full-on unit. So this is technically like our boot camp time, and we're gonna go through all these different techniques on our own paper. But what's fun about it is it's going to eventually create just kind of a cool, simple, abstract looking work of art. But there are 10 techniques. We're gonna combine 2 of them that we're gonna go through, and we'll have today and tomorrow to work on this, so don't stress about finishing it all right this second. But first we have a wash, then wet and wet, dry brush, masking, wax resist, lifting or saran wrap, so I'll kind of show you how you can do both of those together, gradient, value, and salt. So these are all really fun, and they can add a lot of dimension to your work. I like to combine them. There's also different ways that you can layer them for just kind of endless possibilities. So how you're gonna start is you are going to eventually create a piece that looks like this with all your different techniques. So there's only 8 on this paper, but yours will end up having 9. So you're gonna use the blue painter's tape that's at your table, and you're going to create 9, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, oops, I need one more. So 9 total sections on your paper. So if you get to where you only have 8 and just need to add one more section, just grab a piece of tape and create another area for that. Okay. So how this is gonna start, we're gonna start with our wash, which is this one. So this was supposed to be salt, but I didn't have salt at the time. But start with this one, which is wash. And all you're gonna do for wash, and I'm gonna do it in this box right here. All you're gonna do for wash is get a little bit of water on your brush, and we're gonna activate our colors. So you can just kind of get a little bit of water on whichever color you wanna do. Okay, so we're gonna create a wash in this first box. So when I do a wash, I like to create a nice layer of water first. Not too much on your paper, but I don't know if you can kind of see how much is on there. Not enough to run off, but enough just to get it a little bit wet. And then I'm gonna grab a color. So an important thing about watercolor is it's water color. So you always have to make sure you have enough water on your brush and on your palette and in your colors. So how you create that wash is you just bring color into that flat, nice, even layer of water. And it's gonna create a nice, even value of that entire color. This is nice in first layers. We'll go over how to work in layers later, but this is nice if you're just kind of starting and just wanting to create a nice, flat, even layer of a color, and then you can always come back in and build on top of this. So the next one we're gonna do is we're gonna do value. And I'm gonna do value right down here. So I'm gonna start the same way. I'm gonna wet a little bit of my box. So remember, value is the transitions from lights to darks. So I think I'm gonna do purple for this one. So if we're going light to dark, we don't have white, so you can't mix white in with watercolor, but white, the water functions as white. Okay, so as I do this, I'll start by kind of creating a wash, but then you just slowly build it up towards the inside. I'm pulling in more color. I'm not gonna finish that all the way. Then if you have too dark of a transition right here, all you gotta do is kind of get a little bit of water on your brush, not too much, but then you can use your brush to kind of blend it out into some value. Cool. Okay, so you'll see it goes from dark to light. Okay, the next one that I'm gonna do is a gradient. So the gradient is the transition, it's this one right here. So it's the transition from one color to the next, so kind of blending it, but you notice it's a pretty subtle blend. So I'm gonna do yellow and red. So I'll do that one. Why don't I do it right here? And you can pick whichever box you wanna do yours in. It doesn't really matter, it's not a huge deal. So same thing. The only time you're not gonna try to wet your paper is if you're dry brushing or wanting your colors to be a little bit darker. But I tend to always like to add just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of water to the surface that I'm painting before I paint. Okay, so I'm gonna start with that red. Okay, and then in that transition, I am gonna put a little bit of orange. So it blends in nice. Orange, okay. And then I'm gonna add in some yellow. So you'll see this on my palette. I tend to like to keep warm colors, which are red, yellow, orange on one side, cool colors in one, and then blacks and browns separate. It just makes it easy to mix. Sometimes I like to keep this big middle section for lots of mixing that's happening, or just try to group them based on the type of color that they are. So then my yellow, I'm going to take from this side. So in order to make this transition a little bit better, I think I want to bring in more red. Kind of darken that up a little bit. I'll start making that nice orange. Cool. Okay, so once you have that, you're going to want to let these dry. Once it's done drying, you can always go back in and add some more layers to it. Okay, so that one's done. Now I'm going to do dry brush. So dry brush basically means that I'm just gonna have my brush onto the dry paper. So I'm actually gonna do that one down here. So let's do a color we haven't done yet. I'll do green. So I'm still activating my palette, but I'm not really getting a ton of water on it. And then you can just use your brush. And you'll notice that the strokes are less even, that the color gets a little bit darker, and it's not as fluid. So if you notice on this one, it kind of blended out a lot. This is a lot drier. Dry brush is a nice thing to do if you want to come back in and add fine detail on top of stuff. You always want to make sure that whatever surface you're doing dry brush on is completely dry, because if it's not, it'll do that blending and kind of wash it out and things like that. So that's good dry brush. Now I'm going to do the wet and wet. So the wet and wet has multiple steps. First, you're going to want to create a wash. So I'll do a wash on this one. So remember, a wash is just one nice even layer of color. So I'll start with yellow, so I have a lighter color. This one tends to be students' favorite because it is just a little bit more interesting. It's kind of fun and cool to watch how it blends and how the colors work together. So while the surface is still wet and after you've created this wash, you're gonna wanna bring in a color. So I'm gonna do blue, and then you can just kind of blend it into that color that's here. So it'll start kind of blending out some. This is a fun way to add a different texture, different elements, a different color value. If you're wanting to add a gradient, we kind of did that same strategy or did something pretty similar on this with that, but I enjoy this technique. It's fun. It's really interesting to use to get just some interesting transitions and effects and things like that. So when it dries, it kind of looks like that, which is cool. Okay, the next one we're gonna do is called Wax Resist. I have several white crayons, but we have to take care of these so that we have them to use throughout the whole project. So I'll only have like one per table for a while, just so that we can make sure we have enough and that they last a long time. So on a Wax Resist, this is another really fun one. You're gonna want to create some sort of design with your white crayon on your paper. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm just gonna do lines just to do something kind of interesting and geometric. Okay, so you need to make sure that you press down hard enough. And then what's gonna happen is you're going to create a wash. I like to do a wash over those crayons. And then you're going to pick a color. Let's do orange. And you can paint. And wherever that crown is, it's going to resist the water, because wax resists the water, which is kind of cool. So you can see in some of these areas I might not have done the crown hard enough, so you can kind of see where it's blending over. But when it dries, it's gonna kind of look like that, so you can see where that crown is. This is really awesome if you're wanting to build a barrier between colors, or if you're wanting to bring in fine detail, or things like that. Or if you're wanting to paint, let's say I was painting this orange right next to this purple on a painting, but I didn't have time to wait for it to dry. You could use the crown to create an outline and then paint it, and so then you can still move on to the next one without the two blending. You can also use different colors. So I've seen, you know, drawing a blue line and then painting red over it, which is kind of an interesting idea and effect. Okay, now we're gonna do salt. So maybe it has time to dry, so I'll do that one right here. Oops. So if you ever do something like that, all you gotta do is just get a paper towel and kind of blot it off, okay? Okay, do blue. I'm picking a darker color so that y'all can see this. Okay, so with salt, we will all have salt containers at our table. All you do is just shake a little bit out, and you won't see these results until it dries later, but you don't need a ton. But you can kind of see where that's starting to pull some of the pigment off. So it reacts with the water and the paint. And when it dries, you'll scrape it off, and it leaves kind of a really interesting little texture with that. Okay, so the next one that I'm gonna do, you're gonna need another piece of tape. So just pull off a small piece, okay? And you can do whatever design you want, but you're gonna create a design on your paper with the tape and then be able to paint over it, and this is called masking. So it masks whatever paint goes on there, kind of like what we're doing with the outlining of the lines. But it's fun to experiment with it on a different scale too. Okay, now once you have your design put on there with your tape, all you're gonna wanna do is create some sort of little gradient on it or paint a single color. I'm gonna do a gradient of sorts, so I'll do yellow. Oops, throwing my brush. So yellow, maybe in blue to create some of that green. You're gonna wanna let it dry so that paint doesn't bleed too much, but it's eventually going to look like this, okay? All right, so the last one, just real quick, you guys, is lifting or saran wrap. So they're kind of similar. So I'm just gonna create a quick wash. What's a color that we haven't used yet? I'll do So there's kind of two options with how you can create some of this effect. So you can bring in a paper towel, and I'll do this on one side, and create an interesting texture on it like that, and blot some of it off, and it'll leave an interesting kind of design on it. So that's what I did on this one right there. Or you can get some saran wrap and crinkle it up on there, and then you're gonna wanna leave it on here till it dries. So you won't see this until tomorrow, but you can kind of see where it's starting to create some of those designs and different lines and things like that. So it'll have a similar effect to this, and it just kind of creates an interesting, different little texture. You want to make sure that it's wrinkled up nicely and not smoothed out, because that won't do anything. So as as you work on these, we will get to do some fun stuff later with them all, but I want you to kind of go ahead and focus on all of these, do them one at a time, just kind of experiment and have fun. But in the end, when it's all dry, after we finish them, we'll take off our tape and have something like this. Then we're gonna do something really fun with these. So have fun, enjoy. I love watercolor, and I know that you're going to as well.